The morning light crept slow and golden across the rust-stained windows of the garage. Dust floated like memory in the beams that cut through cracked glass. The scent of iron, old oil, and worn-out rubber hung heavy in the air. Armand wiped his hands on a faded cloth. Not that it helped. The black grease had seeped into his palms years ago, as if his skin had stopped being skin and become something mechanical, like he was half wrench, half man. He leaned over the hood of a rusted pickup, humming a tune under his breath, something soft, wordless, a lullaby turned habit. It was the only thing that filled the silence these days. His workbench was chaos. Bolts, sockets, screwdrivers, a small blue lunchbox his daughter had painted with yellow stars. Next to it, a thermos missing its cap. Every tool had been used to death, but each one had a story. The garage door rolled open, screeching like it hated the sun. A sleek black sedan pulled in. Tires clean, body polished. A symbol of another world. The driver stepped out, clicked his shoes on the concrete, and eyed the place like it was a graveyard for forgotten dreams. "You the mechanic?" he asked, flipping his sunglasses up. Armand nodded, wiping his hands again, then instinctively reached to zip up his jacket. It didn't zip. The left side was torn. A long rip down the seam, stitched once, undone again. The man's gaze dropped. "You charge extra for looking like a beggar?" he muttered, tossing the keys onto the workbench with a thud. Armand caught them without looking up. His lips curved into a tired half-smile, not from amusement but from something older, a kind of practiced grace. "No, sir," he said, voice even. "I only charge for what I fix." He turned back to the engine, hands steady, jacket flapping slightly in the draft from the open bay. Behind him, the customer shook his head and walked away, muttering under his breath. But Armand didn't flinch, didn't chase the insult, didn't wear it like it belonged. He just adjusted the wrench in his hand and hummed a little louder. The front door creaked open with a familiar rhythm. Soft hinges, old wood, and the sound of the outside world letting go. Zoya's voice floated in before her steps did. "I smelled grease all the way down the street," she called out cheerfully. Armand looked up from the stovetop, where a dented kettle rumbled quietly. Their home was small, 2 rooms, 1 heater that wheezed when it worked, and walls patched with mismatched paint. But in this space, her voice made everything warmer. "You're late," he said, turning off the flame. "School run took longer?" Zoya hobbled in with practiced ease, her left leg stiff but graceful in its stubbornness. Her crutches were bright blue, one side covered in stickers of cats, the other hand-painted with sunflowers. She had done it herself with leftover art supplies from a community drive. "Miss Anjum made me stay behind to finish my drawing." She plopped down at their tiny dining table, dropping her backpack with a soft thud. "She says I draw feelings, not objects." "What does that even mean?" Armand handed her a warm mug, half milk, half chai, a little sugar. "It means," he said, sitting across from her, "you make people feel things when they look at your work." "That's not easy," Zoya raised a brow. "So I'm like, emotional damage with crayons?" Armand chuckled. "Something like that." She took a sip and smiled. "Thanks, Baba." For a moment the room was still, just steam from the chai curling between them, the quiet click of the heater trying its best, and the hum of love between 2 people who had weathered so much. Then Zoya reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. "Did you see this?" she asked, spreading it across the table. "They're coming here," Armand squinted. A headline in thick serif letters read, "Foreign Royal Delegation to tour historic sites in Pakistan, including our city." A photo below showed Golden Gates, a man in ceremonial dress half turning from a camera, his face mostly obscured. Zoya's eyes sparkled. "Do you think they'll wear crowns in real life?" she asked. Armand raised an eyebrow. "Probably just expensive shoes and cameras." She leaned in close, resting her chin on her hand. "Still, would be nice to see something magical. Even just once." Her words hung in the air like music with no ending. The garage had long since closed, its metal shutter half lowered like a tired eyelid. Streetlights flickered in the distance, casting pale cones of amber onto cracked sidewalks. The night was wind-sharp, one of those evenings where cold didn't just sit on your skin, it whispered through your bones. Armand locked the tools away one by one. He didn't rush. Each piece had its place. It was a kind of ritual, one that made even broken days feel whole. Outside, the street coughed up a gust of wind, and with it came the soft sound of shivering breath. He stepped out and saw him. A man, maybe late 20s, maybe older, sat on the curb near the dumpster, dressed in layers that didn't match. His shoes were thin, his shoulders hunched deep into himself like he was trying to disappear. Armand hesitated. The man noticed and turned his head, but said nothing. His face was calm. Too calm for the way his hands trembled in the cold. "Need a place to go?" Armand asked, stepping closer. The man shook his head once. "Just needed to rest. I'll be gone soon." Armand nodded. The silence stretched, tight and delicate. Then Armand exhaled, reached for the zipper of his jacket, the same one with the torn seam, and pulled it off slowly. "It's not much," he said, holding it out. "But it's warm." The stranger blinked. "You'll be cold," he murmured. Armand shrugged. "It's all right. I've been colder." The man stood, unsure, then gently took the jacket. Careful, like it was made of glass. He slipped it on, the sleeves slightly long. "Why?" he asked. Armand met his gaze. "Because you looked like someone who needed it." A flicker passed behind the stranger's eyes. Something unreadable. Then, for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a wide grin. It was small, almost secret. "Thank you," he said softly. Before Armand could reply, the man turned and walked into the dark, the jacket flapping gently behind him like a flag in retreat. And just like that, he was gone. The morning was cruel. Brittle cold clawed at Armand's skin as he stepped into the garage, sleeves rolled down tight, collar buttoned high. Without the jacket, the chill found every crack in his body, settling into his bones like a second skin. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, casting everything in a sickly, pale hue. The old coffee pot gurgled in the corner, long since burned bitter, and near the workbench the usual suspects stood: Imran, Waqar, and Fayaz, mechanics with louder mouths than hands. Waqar whistled low when Armand passed by. "Where's your royal coat, Armand Bhai?" he called, smirking. "Finally gave up on patching it?" Fayaz chuckled. Maybe he sold it for a heater. Can't blame him. Armand didn't stop, didn't flinch. He grabbed the tire iron from the wall and walked to the car assigned to him, a rusted Suzuki that reeked of stale cigarette smoke and regret. He popped the hood without a word. But Imran wasn't done. "Poor and proud," he muttered behind Armand's back. "Wears dignity like armor, but can't even afford a warm coat." Armand tightened a bolt slowly. His jaw locked, but his hands stayed steady. "I wear what I have," he said without turning, "and I fix what I'm given. That's enough." Silence. For a moment, even the coffee pot paused. Then, "Armand," barked the boss from the office door. Mr. Baig, balding, red-eyed, clipboard in hand. "In my office, now." Armand wiped his hands and walked in. Baig didn't look up. "Look, you're good at what you do. Best we have, honestly. But times are lean." Armand stood still, breath shallow. "We're letting people go next month," Baig said. "No guarantees for anyone, just prepare yourself." Armand swallowed. "No hard feelings," Baig added. Armand said nothing, just nodded once, and stepped out. Outside, the wind whistled through the open bay again. His jacket was gone, but hope, stubborn, quiet hope, stayed behind. Midday, sun beat down harsh and dry, cracking the pavement and making the garage's tin roof hum with heat. Sweat clung to Armand's collar as he crouched beneath a coughing pickup, wrenching at a bolt that refused to turn. Same as every day. Until the silence shifted. A low purr. No, a whisper of a car crept into the yard like a secret, trying not to be heard. Armand looked up, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. It was a car unlike any he'd seen roll through their gate. A long, silver machine with curved edges and soft, gleaming paint. The kind of car that didn't belong to anyone in this neighborhood. The tires were spotless, chrome rims, emblem shining like a promise. The garage boys all stood straighter. The car stopped. The driver's door opened with a soft mechanical click, and out stepped a man. Trim, composed. Dark slacks, black gloves, and eyes hidden behind simple, elegant sunglasses. He looked around once, slowly, then walked toward Armand without hurry. Armand stood, wiped his hands. His heart kicked once. It was him, the stranger from the night before. The jacket, his jacket, was gone now. In its place, a charcoal coat tailored to precision, a scarf draped neatly across his collar. The air around him felt colder, quieter. The man said nothing, just handed Armand the keys. "The engine's stalling at low speeds," he said, voice smooth. "Intermittent. Possibly something in the injectors. I'd like it handled discreetly." Armand took the keys, gaze searching the man's face. Nothing. No flicker of recognition. "No thanks, no memory. Anything else?" Armand asked low. The man paused. "A beat too long." "No," he said at last. "Just take care of her." Then he turned, walked to the customer lounge, and disappeared behind the frosted glass door. Armand stared after him, the keys cold in his palm. The same hands that had shivered in his coat now held gloves made of lambskin. Armand slid beneath the car's sleek undercarriage, eyes scanning the delicate system of valves and coils. Every part was custom. Expensive. The kind of build that didn't belong in places with rust-stained floors and water-damaged walls. He worked in silence, the click of tools echoing like ticking clocks. Outside, the world buzzed. Tires screeching in the distance, a child crying in the alley, the occasional drone of a motorbike coughing to life. But inside the garage, everything narrowed to the rhythm of work, and the quiet, watchful presence behind the frosted glass. The man hadn't left. He sat in the waiting area, back straight, posture royal even in rest. He sipped nothing, said nothing, just watched. Armand could feel it. Every turn of his wrench, every breath drawn beneath the hood, carried weight. Like the car wasn't the only thing being examined. At one point, Armand lifted the hood fully and caught the man's reflection in the polished glass of the car's door. He was staring, not at the car, but at him. Expression unreadable, eyes hidden, but something in his stillness felt deliberate. Armand wiped his hands, closed the hood, checked everything twice, then a third time. He didn't speak until the work was done. Perfect, quiet, thorough. "It's fixed," he said, approaching the lounge. The man rose, slow and composed. Armand held out the keys. The man took them gently, then paused, hand still outstretched. He reached into his coat, Armand's shoulders tensed. But instead of a wallet or cash, the man pulled out a small ivory card. He placed it face down on the edge of the workbench. A soft tap, then he said, "For your time," and walked out. No handshake, no farewell. The sedan purred back to life and vanished down the alley. Armand flipped the card over. Embossed in gold, it read, "Palace Gate, 7 p.m. This evening." No name, no title, just the place. And the hour. The card sat on their chipped dinner table like it didn't belong there. Too clean, too heavy, too silent. Zoya leaned forward, chin on her palm, eyes wide with wonder. "Palace Gate?" she whispered, tapping the letters. "That's not a car dealership, Baba." Armand didn't respond. He stirred sugar into her tea, even though she always preferred it plain. "I don't think this is just a thank you," she said, watching him. "He's someone important, isn't he?" Armand sighed. "I don't know who he is. He came in, dropped the card, and left like he'd never seen me before." Zoya's brows furrowed. "But you gave him your jacket." "In the cold," he nodded. "People forget kindness when they're warm again." Zoya picked up the card, held it to the light like it was a treasure map. "This feels like a story. Like something big is about to happen." Armand finally looked at her. "I've had enough of big things, Betty. They usually come with bigger prices." She lowered the card gently. I think you should go." "I don't belong in palaces." She smiled faintly. "Neither do jackets that know the streets." Armand tried not to smile, but failed. She reached out, squeezed his hand. "Just go," she whispered. "Even if it's only for a few minutes. Even if you walk away after." He stared at the card again. The sun was setting. The palace gates stood tall, gilded in fading gold, flanked by guards with silver trim on their uniforms. Armand stood outside in his cleanest shirt, sleeves pressed, collar crisp, heart pounding louder than the rustling trees. One guard stepped forward, checked the card silently, and opened the gate. The gates opened with a heavy, deliberate swing, not loud, but meaningful, like an invitation whispered instead of shouted. Armand stepped through slowly, his shoes landing on stone too smooth for someone like him. The air inside was different, cooler, thicker with silence and trimmed hedges. The driveway curled like a ribbon of marble, leading to a structure that didn't look like it was made by human hands, all arches and domes and glowing sconces. The palace didn't scream royalty. It hummed it, quiet, proud, and precise. A steward in a dark suit met him halfway. "Mr. Armand?" the man asked. Armand hesitated. "Yes." "This way, please." They moved through corridors lined with portraits. Oil paintings of old rulers stared down with eyes that seemed too alive. The walls were cream and gold. The silence, deafening. They passed a hallway with high windows, moonlight splashing onto mosaic floors like spilled silver. Armand's breath slowed. This place wasn't built for men like him. The weight of his boots, the grease forever stained into his fingernails, the feeling of his repaired shirt collar. Suddenly, everything felt loud. The steward stopped before a tall double door. "Dinner will be served shortly," he said, then pushed it open. Inside, the dining hall glowed like a dream. Chandeliers dripped crystals. A long table stretched across the room dressed in white linen and fine porcelain. Candles flickered in precise formation. Armand stepped in, unsure whether to walk faster or leave. Then, the door at the far end opened, and in walked the man from the garage. Only this time, he wore a deep navy sherwani laced with golden thread, a brooch at his collar, a crest shining at his chest. His posture, taller. His presence, undeniable. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He was royalty. The man crossed the grand dining hall like he belonged to every inch of it. Gone was the shivering figure on the curb. Gone was the quiet client in the garage. What stood before Armand now was a prince, sharpened by lineage, softened by something else. Something recent. He approached with a calm that demanded no applause. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him at the long table. "Please, sit." Armand hesitated. "I wasn't sure if this was real," he said, his voice low, "or if I'd be turned around at the gate." The prince smiled, only slightly. "Neither was I, until this morning." They sat. The room was too grand for only two men. It echoed with their breaths, their silence, and the clinking of porcelain as servers placed food they wouldn't touch. "I'm called Prince Rafi," the man said finally, removing his gloves and placing them gently on the table. "But last night I was just a man freezing in a city that doesn't stop for anyone." Armand's brows drew together. "I didn't know who you were." "I know," Rafi said. "That's why it meant something." He leaned forward, voice lowering like a confession. "I'd escaped a diplomatic event. I was overwhelmed. Stripped the formalities. Wanted to see the city at night, raw. Ended up lost, alone. My driver gone. No security, just me. And then..." He paused. "You?" Armand blinked. "You didn't even ask my name. You just gave me your jacket." "I thought you were in trouble," Armand said. "I was," Rafi answered. "More than you knew." A quiet stretched between them. Then Rafi slid a small envelope across the table. "For your daughter," he said. I know a little about her. Armand didn't reach for it. I'm not looking for handouts, he said, steady. Rafi met his eyes. This isn't charity, he said gently. You saved me. Now allow me to return it. Armand stared at the envelope. It was thin but heavy, like paper that had never known poverty. His fingers twitched once, then settled flat on the table. What's inside? He asked softly. Rafi folded his hands. A letter of endorsement for immediate medical sponsorship. I've contacted a private clinic in Istanbul that specializes in pediatric reconstructive surgeries. They've reviewed your daughter's case. Armand blinked. How do you even know about Zoya? Rafi looked down. Your garage wasn't just tools and rust. There were drawings, framed in grease but full of color. I saw her name. I asked my assistant to look into local hospitals. He paused. I hope you don't mind. Armand shook his head slowly. She's not your problem. She became mine, Rafi said. The moment you gave your warmth to a stranger. Silence stretched like glass. Then Armand spoke, voice lower now. Why me? You could have left. You did leave. And now this? Rafi leaned in, sincere. I've seen opulence my whole life. But kindness like that? That was rare. You gave without measuring what you had left. Armand closed his eyes for a breath. I'm just trying to raise my daughter right, he said. That's all. And I want to help you do that, Rafi replied. But Armand's jaw tightened. He pushed the envelope back gently. I'm not a charity case, he said firmly. Rafi froze, not offended but surprised. You're not, he said quietly. I fix cars. I don't take favors from men in palaces. Armand stood. She's my daughter. I'll find a way. And with that, he turned from the chandelier light and walked toward the grand doors. Rafi sat in silence, the envelope untouched, the food still warm, and the seat across from him suddenly colder. Rain tapped gently on the window pane as Armand sat by the kitchen sink, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on nothing. Zoya had fallen asleep on the sofa, sketchbook open beside her. Tiny castles, smiling suns, stick figures holding hands. But Armand's thoughts were far from fairy tales. The hum of memory returned, slow and sharp. 15 years ago, a younger Armand stood inside the grand lobby of Khalid Motors, shirt pressed, hands oil-stained but proud. He had just completed a week-long project for Mr. Khalid himself, a full restoration of a 1967 Pontiac. He'd worked night shifts, skipped meals, lost sleep. The man had promised him a permanent post, benefits, respect. But now, I don't recall saying permanent, Khalid said, sipping his imported tea. It was trial-based. You were fine, Armand's voice cracked. Sir, I gave you everything. I fixed your personal car. You promised. Promises, Khalid scoffed, standing, are like engines. If they don't serve anymore, we move on. Armand clenched his fists. I have a wife. A baby coming. You said. I said what was convenient. Security came seconds later. Armand didn't resist, just stared. Numb, as the polished doors slammed behind him. Now Armand blinked, throat tight. That day had never left him. Not when his wife died from a treatable infection they couldn't afford. Not when Zoya needed braces they waited 5 years to buy. Not when he passed Khalid's showroom and saw his own work shining in someone else's name. The smell of money. It always came with the sting of betrayal. He rose quietly from the chair, stepped into the bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. Then, staring into the mirror, he whispered to himself, Never again will I owe a rich man. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains, tracing gold lines across the floor. The smell of chai and charcoal pencils filled the small room. Zoya sat cross-legged on the mat. Her crutches leaned against the wall beside her. Papers surrounded her like fallen petals. Armand rubbed his eyes, still heavy from last night's thoughts. What are you drawing now? He asked, his voice still hoarse. Zoya didn't look up. You'll see. He poured water into a kettle, trying to ignore the stack of unpaid bills by the stove. You always say that, he muttered. Then you make something that makes me feel poor and proud at the same time. Zoya giggled. Maybe that's my superpower. He smiled faintly, then turned when she finally lifted the page. It was a palace. Tall arches, waving flags, sunlight spilling through stained glass. But at the bottom corner, she'd drawn something smaller, a tiny garage, and a man standing beside it holding a wrench. "That's you," she said. He exhaled softly. "And this?" "That's where you'll go," she said simply. "The palace from your card." Armin shook his head. "That world isn't for people like us." She tilted her head. "Who said that?" "Everyone who's ever looked at me twice." Zoya leaned forward, serious now. "Baba, people can stare all they want. You still fixed their cars when they were broken. Maybe this is just fixing something bigger." He looked down at her drawing, the palace glowing in her pencil lines. For a second he saw it through her eyes, not as a symbol of wealth, but as something waiting for a story to unfold. He sighed. "One more visit," he said quietly. Zoya's grin spread wide. "That's all I needed to hear." That evening, he folded her drawing carefully and slipped it into his pocket before heading out, just in case the world behind those gates forgot what real gold looked like. The palace didn't look the same in daylight. It wasn't just marble and glass, it was precision. Every tile aligned, every vine trimmed, every drop of water in the fountain seemed rehearsed. Arman walked behind a suited attendant who led them through archways framed with ivory and gold. Beside him, Zoya's eyes darted everywhere, her sketchbook hugged to her chest. Her crutches clicked lightly against the floor, echoing louder than the footsteps of the royal aides. "Baba, look," she whispered, pointing toward a massive mural of the royal family. "They painted even the buttons on their coats." Armin smiled faintly. "Some people want to be remembered for the shine," he said. "Others for what they fixed." The attendant guided them through a gallery lined with glass cases, ancient pocket watches, jeweled pens, and swords so bright they seemed afraid of dust. Then, through a long hallway of mirrors, they entered the heart of the palace. A sunlit courtyard framed by white marble columns. Peacocks strutted lazily through the gardens. A fountain sang softly in the middle, its ripples catching the light. Prince Rafi appeared from behind a column, his demeanor calm but welcoming. "Zoya," he greeted warmly. "You must be the artist. Your father spoke of you." Zoya's eyes widened. "He did?" She turned to Armin, shocked. Armin looked away, pretending to adjust his cuff. "Maybe once or twice," Rafi chuckled. "Come, let me show you something." He guided them along a glass corridor overlooking the royal garage. Cars of every make and decade lined like sleeping beasts. Rafi spoke of history, of engines preserved, and stories kept alive through restoration. Arman listened quietly, his hands clasped behind him. For the first time, the prince's words weren't about charity. They were about respect for craft. But as they turned the corner, soft laughter rippled through the air. Two noblewomen stood near a window, whispering behind jeweled fans. One brought a crippled girl into the hall, and her father looks like he's never seen a suit before. Armin froze, the words sliced clean. Zoya looked up, confused by his stillness. He smiled, faint, forced, and whispered, "Keep drawing, Betty." But in his chest, something tightened. The dining room glimmered under chandeliers that looked like frozen rain. Golden light spilled over crystal, silver, and dishes too delicate to touch. For Arman, it felt less like dinner, and more like walking through someone else's dream. He sat at the far end of the table beside Zoya, whose crutches leaned quietly against her chair. Her eyes darted across the long table. Nobles in embroidered sherwanis, women in silks that shimmered like moonlight, servants pouring water into glasses that cost more than their home rent for a month. Prince Rafi sat at the head, speaking softly to his advisors. Every gesture measured, every word balanced. A butler approached Arman and placed a napkin in his lap with a stiff bow. He mumbled a thank you, unsure if it was the right thing to say. Zoya nudged him. "Baba?" she whispered. "You're sitting like the chair might break." He forced a smile. "Maybe it's the chair that's nervous." She giggled softly, her voice the only real sound in the hall. Then came the questions. "So," said a man across from him, clean-shaven, jeweled ring glinting. "You're the mechanic His Highness keeps mentioning?" Armand nodded. "I am." The man smiled thinly. "And how does it feel to dine under crystal, after eating under fluorescent light?" A few soft chuckles followed. Forks paused mid-air. Armand's eyes lowered to his plate. "Light's light," he said calmly. "Some just shows you more dust." Across the table, Prince Rafi looked up, something like pride flickering behind his composed expression. But the cousin didn't stop. He leaned forward, voice dripping with irony. "Tell me, mechanic." He reached out, taking Armand's hand suddenly, holding it up under the chandelier. "Do royal hands feel strange to you? Or are you used to grease being your perfume?" The table went still. Zoya's face flushed red. Armand pulled his hand back gently. "At least mine can build," he said quietly. "Not just point." A silence deeper than insult filled the room. Prince Rafi placed his glass down. "Gaze cold now." "Enough," he said simply. The cousin opened his mouth, but Rafi's tone cut sharper than any blade. "Kindness isn't weakness, nor is honesty dirt. Remember that, cousin?" No one spoke after that. Zoya reached for her father's hand under the table, her small fingers curling into his rough ones. He didn't look up. He didn't need to, but deep down, a question had begun to burn. Why would a prince defend a man like him? Dinner ended in an uneasy hush. The nobles left in murmurs of silk and perfume, their laughter carefully stitched back together, pretending the moment hadn't cracked the evening in half. Armand stayed seated until the last plate was cleared. Zoya, restless and curious, had wandered toward the far end of the hall, where an old grand piano sat beneath a velvet-draped window. The instrument looked ancient, a ghost from another age, ivory keys dulled by dust and silence. She touched one key. A note trembled into the air. Soft, fragile, beautiful Rafi, still at the head of the table, turned. "Zoya," Armand said quickly, rising. "Don't touch." But she already had. Her small fingers moved again, this time with rhythm. Hesitant, exploring, then sure. The melody she played was simple, but it carried something. A memory of lullabies in cheap apartments, of nights when she hummed to chase her father's exhaustion away. Each note was imperfect. Each note was true. The hall that had once been full of whispers now filled with something else. Silence. Listening. Rafi stood, slowly. The servants froze in place, trays mid-air. Even the chandeliers seemed to still their trembling. Zoya's hair brushed her cheeks as she swayed lightly with the music, eyes half closed. Her world, for this one moment, had no judgment, no pity, just sound. When she finally stopped, her hand rested on the final note, letting it fade into the velvet air. A tear rolled down Rafi's cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it away quickly, glancing at Armand, who looked both proud and terrified. "I didn't know she could play," Rafi said softly. "She doesn't know either," Armand murmured, his voice caught between awe and disbelief. Rafi smiled faintly. "Then maybe she's not the only one." The night air outside the palace was cool and still, touched with the faint scent of roses from the garden walls. Armand and Zoya waited near the front fountain, the faint rippling of water filling the silence between them. Zoya was still glowing from her impromptu performance, her eyes bright. "Did you see how they were all watching, Baba? No one even breathed." Armand smiled, half proud, half worried. "You played like you belonged there." "Maybe I did," she said, teasing. "And maybe you do too." Before he could answer, soft footsteps echoed on the stone path. Prince Rafi appeared from the shadows, his Sherwani jacket unbuttoned now, his expression gentler than before. He dismissed the distant guards with a glance. "You have a remarkable daughter," Rafi said quietly. "She has her mother's courage," Armand replied. "And my stubbornness," Rafi smiled. "Good combination." He looked toward Zoya. "Your music tonight." He paused, searching for words. "It reminded me of something I lost long ago." Zoya tilted her head. What did you lose? Rafi's smile wavered. The sound of sincerity. He turned to Arman then. And your silence tonight reminded me what it looks like. Arman folded his arms. Silence is the only thing the poor can afford without debt. Not tonight, Rafi said. Tonight, it bought respect. The words settled between them. Real, unpolished. Then Rafi reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick with an embossed royal crest. He extended it toward Arman. Arman frowned. We've been through this. Rafi shook his head. It's not charity. He placed the envelope gently in Arman's palm. Its debt repaid. Arman stared at it, torn between pride and gratitude, while the fountain's ripples caught the moonlight and scattered it across their faces. Morning sun spilled through the palace's glass arches, cutting long streaks of gold across polished floors. The world outside the gates was already roaring. Traffic, horns, chaos. But in here, everything moved slower, quieter. Arman stood by the royal garage, his eyes tracing the gleam of metal that caught every ray of light. Machines worth fortunes stood in perfect alignment, guarded by silence and respect. He wasn't supposed to be here this early. He'd come only to return the envelope, but his hands itched to touch the engines, not for wealth, but for the language they spoke. A voice behind him broke the stillness. You look more at peace among gears than among people. Arman turned. Rafi stood at the doorway, hands in his pockets. No crown today. Just a man in plain clothes and quiet eyes. Machines don't judge, Arman said. They just wait to be understood. Rafi smiled faintly. Then perhaps that's what my palace needs. Someone who understands things most of us overlook. He walked closer, his tone measured. The Royal Restoration Division has been looking for an engineer who can handle vintage engines. Someone who respects old things. My staff tells me you have that gift. Arman blinked. You're offering me a job? Rafi nodded. A position. Full salary, accommodation for you and Zoya. You'd maintain the heritage vehicles and oversee restoration. It's honest work, nothing beneath your dignity. Arman stepped back, heart hammering. You don't even know me. Rafi's gaze softened. Maybe not, but I know integrity when I see it, and that's rarer than talent. The silence stretched. Zoya's laughter echoed faintly from the garden outside, chasing a peacock along the path. Her voice was full of life again. Light, unburdened. Arman looked down at the envelope in his hands, then back at Rafi. He took a slow breath. I'll think about it, he said. Rafi smiled, not pushing further. That's all I ask. As Arman turned to leave, the sunlight hit the vintage cars beside him. And for a brief second, their reflections shimmered, like the palace itself was holding its breath. The palace gates closed behind him with a low metallic sigh, a sound that lingered, heavy and final. Arman walked the long road back to the city, his thoughts clattering louder than the traffic. The morning dust rose in swirls around his boots, the sound of distant vendors calling out prices mixing with the honks of passing rickshaws. By the time he reached the garage, the heat was already pressing against his back. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, straightened his shoulders, and pushed open the sliding door. Inside, things were the same, but different. The same tools, the same grime, the same smell of gasoline and burnt rubber. But something was off. Waqar and Fayyaz stopped talking the moment he walked in. Imran turned away, pretending to tighten a bolt that didn't need tightening. Arman frowned. Morning, he said, forcing his tone casual. Any new work orders? No one answered. He walked toward his workbench where his toolbox used to sit. It was gone. A shadow moved from the office. Mr. Beg stepped out, his clipboard pressed tight to his chest. His expression was drawn, not cruel, but weary. Arman, he said quietly. I was going to call you. Arman's pulse ticked faster. Call me? Why? Beg cleared his throat. Head office sent a new mechanic last week. They're cutting hours. He hesitated. You've been replaced. Arman stared at him, disbelieving. Without warning? It wasn't my call, Beg muttered. You know how things are. The air grew thick with the scent of oil and betrayal. Armin looked around, the faces that had once laughed with him now staring at the floor. He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. "Then I'll get my things." Bog stepped aside. "I wish it didn't have to be this way." Armand didn't reply. He walked out into the sun again, empty-handed, the dust rising behind him like smoke from something quietly burning. And though he didn't know it yet, every door that was closing was quietly making space for one that would never close again. The next morning, the sun rose indifferent, warm for everyone but him. Armand walked through the industrial quarter with his resume in a plastic folder, the edges bent and smudged. The streets were alive with engines, horns, and smoke. Workshops spilled over with men in grease-stained overalls, shouting prices, arguing about carburetors, laughing at jokes too small for outsiders to understand. He should have belonged here, but now every face he passed turned a second too long. At the first workshop, the manager looked him up and down. "You worked for Bag's Garage, right?" Armand nodded. 15 years. The man scratched his neck. "Heard you've been working for the Royals lately. Must be nice." "I fixed a car," Armand said. "That's all?" "Sure," the man replied, smirking. "That's what they all say. The palace pays, and suddenly no one remembers the rest of us." Armand frowned. "I don't need a palace. I need work." The manager shrugged, picking up his phone. "Can't help you." "Word's out. You've been bought." Armand froze. "Bought?" The man waved him off. "People talk. They say the prince gave you a jacket made of silk, a job, a fortune, who knows? Doesn't look good for the rest of us." Armand's voice hardened. "I never took a rupee I didn't earn." But the man had already turned away. "Try somewhere else, Ustad." By afternoon, he'd been to 5 more garages. The answer was the same everywhere. Polite refusals layered with suspicion. At the last one, a man he'd once trained, Imran, leaned against the doorway, cigarette between his fingers. "Didn't expect to see you back here," Imran said. "I just need some work," Armand said simply. Imran blew smoke through his teeth, smirking. "Work? You're a royal man now. Go fix their golden chariots." Armand took a step forward. "You think helping someone makes me less of you?" Imran's eyes narrowed. "I think you forgot what side of the gate you came from." Armand's jaw tightened. "No gate can change where I stand." Imran flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his heel. Then, without a word, he spat near Armand's boots. The sound landed heavier than the spit itself. Armand stood still, didn't raise his voice, didn't step back, he just looked at Imran. Eyes calm, voice steady. "Respect's like oil," he said quietly. "Once it spills, good luck cleaning it." Then he walked away, leaving the street noise to swallow the moment whole. The sun had already dipped low, staining the horizon in copper and smoke. Armand pushed open the door of their small apartment, shoulders heavy, steps slow. The world outside had chewed him up and spat him out again, jobless, judged, and somehow still breathing. "Zoya?" he called softly. "I got samosas. The good kind." No answer. He frowned, setting the paper bag on the counter. The place was too quiet. Her sketchbook lay open on the floor beside the couch, a pencil broken clean in two. Then he saw her, on the rug near the table. Her crutches had fallen beside her, one shoe half off. She was lying still, her hair fanned across the carpet like a small dark halo. "Zoya!" He dropped to his knees, panic crushing the air from his chest. Her skin was pale, her lips faintly blue, her chest rose. Barely. "Betty, wake up!" He shook her gently, his voice breaking. "Zoya, please!" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A weak sound escaped her throat, half breath, half cry. He didn't think. He just moved. He scooped her into his arms, heart pounding like a war drum. She felt lighter than she ever had, her head falling against his shoulder. Outside, the streets blurred into noise and chaos. Horns blared. Vendors shouted. The world spun, but Armand ran through it, barefoot almost, holding everything he loved and feared losing. He burst into the small clinic at the corner, gasping. "She fainted. She's not breathing right. Please." The nurse rushed forward, taking Zoya from his arms. "Does she have a file here?" she asked briskly. "No," he said, chest heaving. "But I'll pay. I'll—" Her expression faltered. "We'll need an advance. Private cases only." Armand's pockets were empty. His voice cracked. "Please, she's all I have." The nurse hesitated, but rules were rules. And as Armand stood there, helpless, hollow, a thought cut through the noise, cruel and undeniable. The palace could save her, but his pride wouldn't let him call. The night pressed in tight, the city's noise fading into a dull hum outside the clinic's flickering lights. Armand sat on a hard wooden bench, head in his hands, the smell of antiseptic and fear thick in the air. Behind the curtain, Zoya lay on a cot, her breath shallow, her pulse faint. An old ceiling fan turned lazily above her, blades squeaking with every revolution. He'd sold his watch for the medicine, but it wasn't enough. The doctor said she needed tests, real ones, and likely a procedure beyond anything this small clinic could offer. He'd run out of pride long before the nurse asked for payment again. For a long time, he stared at the cracked phone in his hand. His thumb hovered over a single number, the one printed faintly on the ivory card that still lived in his wallet. He'd told himself he'd never call, never need, never beg. But when he looked at Zoya's pale face, her lips dry, her fingers twitching like they were still holding an invisible crayon, something broke inside him. He whispered, "Forgive me, Betty," and pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then, a click. "Armand?" The voice on the other end was calm, clear, unmistakable. "Your Highness?" Armand began, but his voice cracked. I wouldn't call unless—" "Where are you?" Rafi interrupted. "The city clinic." "My daughter—" She fainted. "They won't treat her without—" "I'm coming," Rafi said. "Stay where you are." "No, sir, please, I didn't mean—" But the line had already gone dead. Armand's breath hitched. The room spun, part disbelief, part guilt. Minutes later, headlights sliced through the night. A convoy stopped outside the clinic. Black cars, quiet engines, urgent steps. And through the sliding doors came Prince Rafi himself, his coat thrown open, a royal physician close behind. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes found Armand's, and without judgment, only quiet command, he said, "Take me to her." The hallway smelled of alcohol, steel, and prayers. Bright white lights spilled across sterile floors, bouncing off walls that had seen too many kinds of heartbreak. Rafi stood beside Armand outside the operating room, their reflections blurring together in the glass window. Inside, doctors in green gowns moved quickly around Zoya's small frame, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor the only sound in the world that mattered. "She'll be all right," the royal physician murmured. "It's good you called when you did. Another hour, maybe less." He didn't finish. Armand nodded stiffly, his throat refusing to shape words. His eyes burned, but he kept them locked on the little figure under the bright surgical lights. Rafi stood quietly beside him, hands clasped, the formality stripped from his posture. For the first time, the prince looked like a man carrying his own ghosts. "I remember my mother's hospital room," Rafi said softly, almost to himself. "It smelled like this, cold and too clean. My father didn't make it in time." Armand turned, startled by the crack in his voice. Rafi wasn't looking at him, just the door. "I used to think money could outrun pain," Rafi continued. "But pain doesn't care what's in your bank or on your crest." Armand swallowed. "No, it doesn't." They stood in silence again. Minutes stretched like hours. Every heartbeat in that room felt like a hammer against Armand's ribs. Then, through the small window, the doctor lifted his hand, a brief nod, and the tension broke like a wave. Armand exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. "She's stable," the physician said, stepping out. "We'll move her to recovery soon." Rafi's hand landed gently on Armand's shoulder. "She's safe now." Armand nodded, his lips trembling. "Thank you. No thanks," Rafi interrupted quietly. "You'd have done the same." When the prince turned away to make a call, Armand sank onto the bench, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. And there, in that bright, cold hallway, the man who never cried finally did. Silent, shaking, like someone who'd spent his whole life fixing everything but himself. Morning light crept gently into the hospital room. Soft, golden, and forgiving. The machines beside the bed hummed quietly, their steady rhythm blending with the faint chirp of birds outside. Zoya stirred under the white sheets, blinking at the brightness, the world slowly coming back into focus. Her throat was dry, her voice faint. "Baba?" Arman lifted his head instantly. He'd been sitting in that same chair all night, elbows on his knees. Exhaustion heavy in every muscle. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of worry and sleepless prayers. "I'm here," he whispered, leaning close. Zoya's lips curved into a tired smile. "Did it snow?" Arman frowned. "Snow?" She lifted a trembling hand and pointed weakly toward her forehead. He followed her finger, and there, stuck just above her brow, was a small golden sticker shaped like a crown. The edges glittered faintly under the morning light. Arman chuckled, the sound raw but full of relief. "Where'd that come from?" Zoya smiled, her eyelids heavy again. "The prince gave it to me. Said it was for brave girls who don't quit." Arman turned. Rafi stood quietly near the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, eyes soft. "She wanted to know if she could have a crown," Rafi said gently. "I told her real ones aren't always made of gold." Arman's throat tightened. "You didn't have to—" Rafi shook his head. "I wanted to." He took a step closer, voice low. "She reminds me of what courage looks like when it has no armor." Zoya shifted in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "Thank you." Rafi smiled faintly. "She'll be fine now. She's stronger than most of us." Arman's hand found his daughter's, holding it as if letting go would undo everything the night had saved. His eyes glistened. Pride, love, and fear tangled together. He whispered, "You're my little queen, Betty." And when her small fingers tightened around his, the dam finally broke. He bent forward and hugged her tight, face buried in her blanket, the crown sticker gleaming between them. Fragile, golden, and unshakably real. Days turned into weeks, and with them came a quiet rhythm, the kind that follows storms. Zoya healed faster than the doctors predicted. Her laughter returned first, light and mischievous, echoing through the hospital halls. Her sketches came next, brighter, fuller, always finding their way onto every scrap of paper she could reach. And Arman? He changed too. It began with small steps, helping in the palace's mechanic bay, while Zoya recovered under the royal doctor's watch. At first he only meant to keep busy, to repay what he thought he owed. But soon, the rhythm of the engines and the weight of the tools felt like home again. The royal garage was unlike any he'd ever seen. Rows of vehicles that spanned decades, each with a story older than the men who drove them. Rafi had told the staff that Arman would observe, but the moment he touched an old carburetor, his hands found purpose again. "You know these better than the manuals," one of the royal engineers murmured as Arman leaned over an engine. Arman just smiled. "Machines speak. You just have to listen to the rattle, not the shine." Every day, he worked quietly, fixing what others thought unfixable, coaxing life back into forgotten machines. Some of the palace nobles passed by and whispered, "There's the mechanic the prince dragged in." "Sir Arman," one mocked, voice dripping with laughter. He didn't answer, didn't flinch, because for the first time in a long time, the sound of gears turning meant more than their words ever could. At night, when the halls grew still, Zoya would sit nearby sketching him, her hero under chandeliers instead of streetlights. And if the nobles mocked, she just smiled and whispered, "Let them talk. Baba. Even clocks need hands to move." The palace courtyard shimmered in afternoon light, its marble tiles reflecting the faint flutter of royal flags overhead. Servants hurried, nobles gathered, and the hum of conversation filled the open air. A ceremony was about to begin. Arman stood near the edge of the crowd, his hands folded in front of him, dressed in his cleanest shirt. Zoya sat nearby in her wheelchair, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. eyes gleaming with pride. He hadn't expected to be here. He'd only come to return a set of keys from the royal garage. But fate, as it had often done lately, had other plans. Raffi appeared at the top of the grand steps, dressed not as a prince, but as a man prepared to speak truth. His voice carried, steady but sincere. "Today," Raffi began, "we honor those who restore more than what's broken, those who remind us what strength looks like when it's humble." The crowd murmured. Raffi's gaze found Armin's across the courtyard. He continued, "It's easy to rule with gold, harder to lead with gratitude. This palace runs not because of its crowns or carriages, but because men like Armin remember how to make things live again." A ripple of whispers passed through the nobles. Armin's heart pounded, the air thick around him. "Mr. Armin," Raffi said, descending the steps, "you once gave warmth to a stranger with nothing to offer in return. Today I return the favor. Not with wealth, but with purpose." He reached into his coat and drew out a royal insignia pin, simple yet shining. "You will serve as the chief palace engineer, overseeing all royal restorations and teaching apprentices. Your skill is no longer just labor, it's legacy." Gasps filled the courtyard. Even the skeptics fell silent. Raffi extended his hand. Armin hesitated for a heartbeat, then clasped it firmly. Their palms met, grease and gold, callus and silk, two worlds shaking hands like equals. In that moment, the applause began, not the kind meant for royalty, but for a man who'd earned his place in silence. From her chair, Zoya's voice rose above the noise, bright and trembling. "That's my Baba!" Raffi turned, smiling softly. "And this," he said to the gathered court, "is what honor looks like when it has oil on its hands." Weeks slipped into a steady rhythm. Every morning, sunlight found Armin already at work in the royal garage, sleeves rolled, brow damp, humming quietly as his tools clicked in rhythm. The other engineers began to defer to him, not out of fear, but respect. Even Raffi stopped by sometimes, watching him work with the same quiet pride a teacher has for his best student. But not everyone shared that pride. Lord Navid, cousin to the late king and master of ceremony, watched from a distance, his ringed fingers tightening each time he saw the prince laugh with the mechanic. To him, class had order, and Armin's place in it was far below the oil stains he scrubbed each evening. One morning, as Armin tightened the last bolt on a royal carriage engine, Navid's voice echoed behind him. "You work as if your sweat is perfume, mechanic." Armin straightened. "Work smells like honesty, my lord." Navid smirked. "Careful, too much honesty spoils loyalty." Their eyes met, brief, sharp, and unfinished. That night, Armin lingered late, checking every vehicle one last time. Zoya waited for him near the doorway, sketching the cars under soft lamplight. "You should rest, Baba," she murmured. "Soon, Betty," he said, wiping his hands. "Engines don't forgive shortcuts." When they left, the garage fell silent. Shadows crept in through the tall glass panes. A faint creak, a figure slipping between cars, a wrench clinking against metal. Someone loosened the fuel line of the royal convoy's lead vehicle, slow, deliberate, practiced, and vanished before the guards made their rounds. The next morning, Armin returned early. The car glistened under the golden light, perfect on the surface, poison underneath. As he reached for his wrench, Lord Navid's voice thundered from behind the courtyard gates. "Stop! Do not touch that car!" Guards stormed in, pointing. "The mechanic!" Navid roared. "He tampered with the prince's vehicle!" The courtyard froze. Armin's wrench slipped from his hand and clattered onto the marble. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Guards surrounded Armin before he could even speak. The sun glared off their metal helmets, the air heavy with accusation. "Sir, please," Armin said, voice steady despite the noise. "There's a mistake." Lord Navid strode forward, his robe dragging across the marble, his smile sharp as a blade. "A mistake?" he sneered. "The royal convoy's lead car was sabotaged. The bolts loosened, the fuel line nearly torn, and you were the last man seen near it." Murmurs rippled through the assembled staff. Some drew back, others whispered behind their hands. Zoya stood frozen near the palace steps, her sketchbook trembling in her hands. "Baba?" she whispered. Arman looked at her, his heart pounding, then turned to Navid. "You're lying. I checked that car twice last night. Every line, every bolt." Navid laughed, spreading his arms theatrically. "Oh, listen!" The commoner defends himself with pride. "How touching!" "I don't care for your games," Arman shot back. "You've never touched an engine in your life, and you think you can smell sabotage from a distance?" Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Navid stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Careful, mechanic. You forget where you stand." "I remember exactly where I stand," Arman said quietly. "Just not beneath you." For a moment silence cut through the noise like a blade. Then Rafi's voice echoed from the palace entrance. "What's happening here?" Everyone turned. Navid bowed slightly. "Your Highness, we discovered deliberate tampering with your vehicle. The mechanic was seen leaving the garage late at night." Rafi's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." Navid's smirk returned. "Then perhaps you should take it seriously." Rafi's gaze flicked to Arman. "Is it true?" Arman's jaw tightened. "No, sir. I'd never endanger your life or anyone's." Rafi's silence stretched too long. The crowd shifted uneasily. Zoya's eyes filled with fear. For the first time, Rafi didn't rush to his defense. "Until we know more," he said finally, his tone cold. "Arman will refrain from entering the royal garage." Navid smiled like a vulture. And as the guard stepped forward to escort him away, Arman caught Rafi's gaze. Not angry, not pleading, just disappointed. The kind of silence that hurts more than words. The palace that once felt like a second chance, now felt like a cage. Arman was reassigned to the outer quarters. A forgotten corner of the estate where dust lived longer than memory. Gone were the polished marble floors and sunlight streaming through glass domes. Here, walls were cracked, air thick with old paint and silence. The guards escorted him without a word. He didn't argue. He just carried his tool bag, heavier with shame than with metal. Rafi hadn't come to see him since the accusation. Not a word, not a visit. Just distance. Zoya, too, was quieter these days. She still sketched. Always sketches. But the colors were duller, her smiles more forced. Arman tried to keep working. Cleaning, repairing old lamps, fixing locks that no one used anymore. Anything to feel useful. Anything to keep the weight of disgrace from crushing him. At night, he sat by the cracked window watching palace lights glow far across the courtyard. He could see the shimmer of chandeliers from Rafi's wing, the same halls that had once echoed with his daughter's laughter. Zoya would bring him food sometimes, still warm from the main kitchen. "I heard Lady Sophia say your bread tastes like effort," she'd tease, trying to pull a smile from him. He'd ruffle her hair and manage one anyway. Effort tastes better than gold. But one evening, when he returned from repairing a leaking pipe, he stopped outside the courtyard archway. Voices drifted through, polished, mocking. Imagine the prince taking advice from a mechanic, or letting his crippled girl eat at his table. The poor always forget where the dirt ends and the marble begins. Zoya was there too, frozen in the shadow, sketchbook clutched against her chest. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide. Arman stepped forward quickly, pulling her close before she could speak. "Don't listen," he whispered. Her voice cracked. "They hate you, Baba." He swallowed hard. "No, they hate what they don't understand." She blinked up at him. "Then we'll make them understand." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "No, Betty, we'll just keep standing." "That's louder." But as they walked back toward the dim hallway, his hands clenched. Somewhere deep down, the man who once vowed never to bow had started to tremble. Not from fear, but from disappointment that kindness could cost so much. The afternoon sun poured through the palace windows like molten glass, painting long golden lines across the polished floor. Prince Rafi sat in his study, surrounded by maps and ledgers, his focus sharp, but his mind elsewhere. The murmurs about the mechanic still lingered in every corner of the court, and though his heart doubted them, his silence had built walls between himself and truth. He didn't hear the knock. He only looked up when the door swung open. "Your Highness?" came a small but firm voice. Zoya stood there, crutches steady, sketchbook pressed to her chest like armor. Her cheeks were flushed, not from fear but from determination. Rafi blinked. "Zoya? You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said, closing the door behind her. "But I couldn't wait anymore." He set his pen down. "Where's your father?" "Working," she said. "Or pretending to. You sent him to the broken rooms, didn't you?" Rafi hesitated. "It's temporary. Until things are fair," she cut in. "Until people stop whispering?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. Rafi stood slowly. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," she said. "You believed them. You let them call him a liar." "Zoya," he sighed. "I have to protect this palace. I can't—" She took a step forward on her crutches, every movement steady, brave. "Protect it from what? Honest hands? From someone who gave you his only jacket when you had nothing?" Rafi froze. Her words hit harder than she knew. She looked up at him, her eyes burning now. "Do you let truth bend just because you wear gold?" The question hung in the air, too big for the room, too sharp for denial. Rafi didn't answer. Couldn't. She stared at him for a heartbeat longer, then turned, her crutches clicking against the marble with every determined step. When the door closed behind her, Rafi was still standing there, surrounded by silence, and by the reflection of the man he was afraid he'd become. That night, the palace slept under the hum of cicadas and the faint ripple of moonlight on the fountains. But in his private chamber, Prince Rafi sat alone, still, silent, and haunted. Zoya's words wouldn't leave him. "Do you let truth bend just because you wear gold?" He stood before the mirror, the same one that had reflected generations of rulers before him. Men who believed power was purity, that crowns meant certainty. For the first time, Rafi saw something else. He saw doubt staring back. He saw a man who'd been saved once by a stranger in the dark, and now repaid that light with silence. His memory pulled him backward, to that winter night on the curb. He remembered the cold biting at his neck, the way his fingers had gone numb, the way fear had crept in. Fear not of dying, but of being ordinary. And then a shadow had fallen across him, a torn jacket, a soft voice. "Here, take this." Armand hadn't asked for a name, hadn't recognized a prince stripped of his crown. He'd simply helped. Rafi swallowed hard, his reflection blurred. He looked down at his hands, soft, clean, and useless. The same hands that had once been warmed by a mechanic's jacket now trembled with guilt. He whispered to the mirror, "You've become the men he warned his daughter about." He turned sharply, striding to his desk. The resolve in his eyes was new, heavy but certain. "Farid," he called, summoning his aide. The door opened a moment later. "Yes, Your Highness?" "Gather the palace security chief," Rafi said, "and every camera log from the night before the accusation. No one speaks of this. Not until I say so." Farid hesitated. "You're reopening the case?" Rafi nodded once. "No," he said quietly. "I'm reopening my conscience." As the aide hurried out, Rafi glanced once more at the mirror. The prince who looked back at him wasn't perfect, but for the first time he was honest. The palace security wing was quiet at dawn, its sterile corridors glowing blue under the hum of monitors. Guards stood stiff as Prince Rafi entered, his coat unbuttoned, eyes sharper than the cameras that lined the walls. "Play back the night before the accusation," he ordered. "All garage angles." The head of security hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, Your Highness." Screens flickered to life, one after another. Timestamps rolling backward, faint static filling the silence. Rafi leaned forward, hands braced on the console. The footage began. Armin locking up the royal garage. Zoya waiting by the doorway, sketchbook in hand. Both leaving quietly at 10:37 p.m. Then, the empty garage. 11:02, 11:45, and then, at 12:03 a.m., movement. Two figures slipped through the shadows. Uniformed men, not mechanics, palace guards. One shone a flashlight over the convoy car. The other knelt, pulling a wrench from his belt. The camera caught his face clearly as he loosened the bolts on the fuel line. Calm, methodical. Rafi's jaw tightened. Pause. The image froze. The saboteur mid-motion. A name tag glinted under the light. "Is that?" the chief started. "Lord Navid's guard," Rafi finished, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped closer to the screen, his reflection overlapping the frozen image. His breath fogged the glass for a second, then cleared, revealing the truth he already knew. Armand had been innocent all along. Rafi exhaled, the sound sharp in the silent room. "Pull the rest of the footage," he said. "Back up every angle. No leaks." "Yes, Your Highness?" As the chief hurried to obey, Rafi straightened. The weight of his silence over the past days pressed heavy on his chest. But now it had a direction. "Prepare the throne room," he said finally. "We settle this before every voice that doubted him." He turned toward the door, his reflection catching on the steel surface one last time. The prince, who had once been lost, now walking toward something righteous. The palace would soon learn that truth. Like an engine, only runs clean when every hidden piece is exposed. The throne room of the royal palace had never felt heavier. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, scattering colors across marble floors. Courtiers filled the hall, their voices a low electric murmur. At the far end, the royal dais waited, a carved symbol of power, its golden edges gleaming like judgment itself. Prince Rafi sat at the center, flanked by senior advisors and Lord Navid, who stood tall and composed, his robes immaculate. He looked like a man already victorious. At the base of the stairs, 2 guards led in Armand. His shirt was clean but plain, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes steady, calm, but not submissive. Zoya watched from the gallery above, her fingers clenched around her sketchbook, every page trembling. Rafi rose slowly, his voice carried without force. "This court gathers today to resolve an accusation, one that concerns not just a man, but the integrity of this palace." Lord Navid bowed slightly. "Your Highness, the matter is clear. The mechanic tampered with the royal convoy, risking your life. Witnesses confirm he was the last to leave the garage." Rafi's gaze didn't waver. "And what of proof?" Navid smiled thinly. "Proof is in what we see, not what we invent." Rafi gestured toward the chief of security. "Play it." The hall darkened as the projector whirred to life. On the marble wall the footage appeared. The garage at midnight, the guards entering, the wrench turning, the sabotage. Gasps filled the room. Navid's composure faltered. He stepped forward. This could be doctored." Rafi's voice dropped to a quiet thunder. "It isn't. I verified it myself." "Those men were yours?" Navid's face drained of color. "Your Highness—" "Enough." Rafi's words cracked through the hall. "For days I let silence shame an innocent man. No longer." He descended the steps, stopping beside Armand. "This man," Rafi said, voice strong now, "gave warmth to a stranger in the cold. He repaired not just our machines, but our faith in what is decent. And when I turned from him, he still stood with dignity." Rafi looked around the stunned court. "He is not our servant," he placed a hand on Armand's shoulder. "He is our standard." The hall fell completely, still. Even the chandeliers seemed to listen. Zoya's eyes brimmed as her father looked up, not at a prince, but at a man who'd finally remembered what crowns were meant to protect. The silence in the throne room cracked like thunder. Lord Navid stood frozen, the echo of Rafi's words still vibrating through the high ceilings. "He is not our servant. He is our standard." The courtiers shifted, uncertain which way the tide would turn. Nobles who had whispered against Armand now avoided his gaze, the sharp scent of fear replacing arrogance. Navid tried to speak, his voice dry and thin. "Your Highness, this is a misunderstanding. My men, perhaps they acted without—" Rafi's hand rose. "Without your orders? Do not insult me twice, Navid." He turned toward the guards. "Bring the saboteurs forward." 2 soldiers were dragged in, wrists bound. Their uniforms were stripped of insignia, their heads lowered. The older one stammered, We acted under instruction, my lord. He promised protection. Gasps filled the chamber. Navid's face went pale. Lies! They're lying! Rafi's eyes narrowed. Enough. The footage, the testimony, and your own disdain have spoken louder than truth could. He descended one step, his tone cutting clean. Lord Navid, you were entrusted with dignity, and used it to poison those beneath you. You have forgotten the weight of the crown you hide behind. Navid's defiance cracked. Please, your highness. My family name. Your name, Rafi interrupted, no longer belongs to the service of this palace. He turned to the guards. Strip him of his title and lands. He will answer before the state council. The hall stirred. A low murmur of disbelief, relief, and something close to respect. Navid's robe dragged behind him as the guards took him away. His head bowed. His rings clattered to the marble like echoes of a fallen empire. Rafi exhaled slowly, then turned toward Arman. Justice may be late, he said softly, but it does not forget. Arman lowered his eyes. I never asked for revenge, sir. Rafi nodded. That's what makes you worthy of more than I can give. He paused, his gaze steady. Your post is restored, or you may choose another. This time, the decision belongs to you. Arman looked up, weary, proud, and uncertain. For the first time in his life, power was in his hands, and it terrified him more than poverty ever had. Spring unfolded gently across the palace grounds. The same gardens where nobles once whispered now bloomed with color. Wildflowers, jasmine, marigold, and roses that spilled fragrance into the air. At the far edge of the courtyard, laughter echoed softly. Children running, sketchbooks fluttering, paint smudges on their cheeks, and in the center of it all stood Zoya, her crutches gleaming in the sunlight, her smile wide and proud. The garden she had designed, once just drawings on paper, was finally real. Arman stood by the gate, hands in his pockets, watching her move among the plants with care and precision, showing the younger ones how to plant seeds without crushing their roots. Baba, she called, waving. Look, they actually used my layout. He grinned, walking closer. Of course they did. No one says no to a girl who carries blueprints instead of excuses. She giggled, wiping dirt on her dress. Prince Rafi said I should make the garden for everyone, even the staff's children. And did you? She pointed proudly at a group of servants' kids playing near the fountain. They're all here. He said beauty shouldn't have a door. Arman's eyes softened. He's right. They walked together along the cobblestone path, the sound of the fountain filling the pauses between them. Near the entrance, a small golden plaque gleamed in the sun. Zoya bent down to read it aloud. This garden was built with grease, not gold, for hearts that know work is art. She looked up at her father, smiling. You like it? Arman swallowed hard. It's perfect. She tilted her head. Prince Rafi said you helped choose the words. He chuckled softly. Maybe. Maybe he just stole them from my toolbox. Zoya laughed, resting her head lightly against his arm. You fixed engines, Baba, but you also fixed us. He smiled at her. That quiet, grateful kind of smile that holds more pride than words ever could. As the wind rustled through the leaves, the garden shimmered like a living thank you. Not just to a prince, but to a father who refused to give up, even when the soil was hard. The Royal Heritage Museum smelled faintly of polish and stories. Every wall gleamed with history. Swords behind glass, robes behind velvet ropes, portraits staring proudly from golden frames. But near the back, where visitors' steps grew slower and reverent, stood a new exhibit, a small section cordoned off by a single rope. Nothing grand, nothing jeweled, just a set of old, oil-stained tools. Arman stood before them now, his reflection ghosting across the glass. His wrench, his pliers, the dented spanner with the initials AK carved by a younger, angrier man who thought the world would never remember his name. Beside them hung the jacket, the one he'd once given to a freezing stranger. Cleaned, restored, its fabric still rough, but now lined inside with royal silk to preserve it from time. Above it, a brass plate read, "The Mechanic's Gift, a lesson in humanity." Zoya stood next to him, her small hand folded into his. Her eyes shone as she read the description aloud, her voice catching on the words, "When the kingdom's heart grew cold, a man without riches gave warmth. He expected nothing and received everything that mattered." Armand blinked hard, trying to hide the wetness in his eyes. "They make it sound like a story." She smiled softly. "It is a story." He looked down at her. "Ours?" She nodded. "The one you didn't know you were writing." Visitors passed, whispering. Some bowed their heads slightly. Others just stared, quietly moved. Zoya pressed her forehead against the glass, gazing at the tools that once fed their lives. "They don't look small anymore," she murmured. Armand tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, her eyes glimmering with the kind of certainty only a child's heart can hold. "Now the world sees," she said, "what I always saw." Armand exhaled, his smile breaking through the years of weight that had lived behind it. Somewhere behind them, a quiet voice whispered to a guide, "That jacket, it belonged to the man who saved the prince, didn't it?" And for once, the answer didn't need to be spoken. It was written in the light on the glass. The palace felt different now, not louder, not busier, just warmer. Maybe it was the spring breeze through the open windows, or maybe it was the quiet respect that followed Armand wherever he walked. His new quarters were modest by royal standards, but to him they felt like another world. A small room near the Royal Engineers Wing. White walls, high ceilings, sunlight spilling across a neatly made bed. On the workbench by the window, rows of tools lay perfectly arranged, not polished, just ready. He stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. His hands traced the worn wood of the bench, the kind that still carried the faint scent of grease. For the first time, he belonged somewhere without having to earn it twice. Zoya's laughter drifted from the courtyard below, where she taught the younger children how to plant flower beds in recycled tins. Every sound of her joy filled the room like wind chimes. Rafi entered quietly, a stack of papers under his arm. "You've made this place your own already." Armand smiled. "It's smaller than the garage." "Bigger in meaning," Rafi replied. He set the papers down and extended his hand. "You've rebuilt more than engines, Armand. You've rebuilt faith, mine included." Armand nodded, humbled. "Faith runs better when oiled with action," Rafi chuckled. "Then let this be your workshop. No titles, no hierarchy. Just honest work and open doors." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, one more thing. The museum called it the Mechanic's Gift. But for me, it was the kingdom's." After he left, Armand reached into the small wooden trunk by his bed. From it, he pulled the same torn jacket, the one he'd once given away, now patched, preserved, but still his. He hung it on the wall, right next to a royal ceremonial coat that Rafi had insisted he keep. Two symbols side by side, one of birthright, one of earned respect. And as the light caught both fabrics, gold threads meeting grease stains, they looked less like opposites and more like parts of the same story. The palace garden had never seen such a crowd. Rows of chairs filled the courtyard, their legs sinking slightly into soft grass still wet with morning dew. Banners of deep blue and gold fluttered in the breeze. Children from nearby towns sat cross-legged in front rows, eyes wide with curiosity. It was the royal education ceremony, a new initiative Prince Rafi had begun for children of palace staff and nearby villages, and at the center of it stood a small wooden podium barely reaching Zoya's shoulders. She adjusted the microphone nervously, her crutches tucked neatly beside her chair. A hush settled over the crowd. Rafi watched from his seat beside Armand, a faint, knowing smile on his face. Zoya took a deep breath, the kind that fills the chest before a leap. Her voice trembled only at first. "My name is Zoya," she began. "I used to think that stories only belonged to people in books, the ones who wore crowns or lived in castles. But then I realized, every person who keeps going, even when it's hard, is writing their own story. A ripple of warmth moved through the audience. My father, she continued, glancing toward Armin, fixes things for a living. Cars, engines, even old clocks. But what he really fixes is hope. He taught me that no matter how broken something looks, it can run again. Armand's eyes shimmered. Zoya smiled, her small voice steady now. When I was sick, he never gave up. When people looked down on him, he stood taller. When we had nothing, he gave everything. She paused, letting the wind carry her words. My father didn't fix cars, she said softly. He fixed my future. A standing silence followed. The kind that exists only when a truth hits home. Rafi rose first, clapping slowly, reverently. Then the others followed, nobles, workers, even the guards, until the garden echoed with applause that rolled like thunder. Armand could only shake his head, laughing through tears, and as Zoya looked at him from the podium, she mouthed two words that meant more than any speech ever could. Thank you. The royal garage gleamed under afternoon light, its brass fixtures and vintage frames glowing like memory. Engines hummed softly, the steady heartbeat of old machines being brought back to life. Armin stood over an open hood, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of oil across his wrist. The smell of metal and polish filled the air. Behind him, footsteps echoed, measured, clean, but unafraid of grease. Prince Rafi approached, wearing a plain cotton shirt instead of royal robes. They told me you were rebuilding the ceremonial car for the founders' parade, he said. Armand nodded. She's a beauty, 70 years old and still trying to breathe. Rafi smiled faintly. Sounds like my counsel. They both laughed. Quiet, genuine. Rafi picked up a wrench from the table and weighed it in his hand. Mind if I help? Armand raised an eyebrow. Last time you touched a wrench, I had to fix it. Then think of this as redemption, Rafi said, crouching beside him. And for the next hour, the prince and the mechanic worked side by side, tightening bolts, aligning gears, adjusting valves. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, the kind of silence where two men from opposite worlds finally understood the same language. At one point, Rafi paused, glancing at Armin. You ever think about that night? The one in the cold? Armand nodded slowly. Every day. But not for the jacket. Rafi looked up. Then for what? For the reminder, Armand said softly. That sometimes giving costs nothing, and still changes everything. Rafi's hands stilled. That's why I wanted this moment. The car will be in tomorrow's parade, but this is the real ceremony. Armin smiled faintly. Greece and gratitude. Rafi laughed quietly. Exactly. Just then, a young reporter entered the garage, notebook in hand, eyes wide. Your Highness, Sir Armin. Just one picture, please. Rafi looked at Armand, who rolled his eyes good-naturedly. Make it quick. The reporter raised his camera as the two men leaned against the restored car, one in a smudged shirt, the other in rolled sleeves and oil-stained fingers. The shutter clicked. A single image. Two men, two worlds, one purpose. Later that evening, the photo would make the front page with a headline that quietly rewrote history. The Prince and the Mechanic. A kingdom rebuilt by hand. The grand ballroom glowed with the warmth of hundreds of lanterns. Soft music drifted through the air, violins weaving melodies that shimmered against laughter and gentle applause. Tonight wasn't about politics or ceremony. It was about love, Prince Rafi's love. He stood at the center of the room wearing a charcoal sherwani with silver embroidery that caught the light like quiet stars. Beside him stood Layla, the palace educator, kind-eyed, graceful, the one who'd taught Zoya and the other children how to dream without forgetting where they came from. Zoya stood proudly near the front, tiny flower petals clutched in her hands. Her crutches were gone now, replaced by balance, strength, and the confidence of a child who'd already conquered her mountain. When the music softened, Rafi took a small step forward, the crowd parting around him like a tide. He turned to Layla, eyes steady but full of emotion. Some people arrive in your life as teachers, he said softly, his voice carrying through the hall. Others as reminders of who you used to be. Layla smiled, tears glinting. And sometimes, he continued, they become both. He dropped to one knee, not as a prince, but as a man, and held out a small velvet box. The gasps from the nobles were swallowed by applause from the servants who'd gathered at the edges of the room. Layla, he said, will you walk beside me, not above, not behind, but beside me, as we build something worthy of every name under this roof? Her laughter broke through her tears. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The hall erupted in joy. Zoya threw her petals into the air, giggling. Armin clapped from where he stood, pride glowing brighter than any chandelier. Rafi rose and turned to the audience, emotion trembling just beneath his composure. I once thought being royal meant being untouchable, he said. But I learned that the truest crowns are invisible. I needed saving. And a mechanic. He looked at Armin, smiling deeply. Gave me more than warmth. He gave me direction. Applause thundered through the hall, echoing through marble and memory alike. And for once, both rich and poor cheered not for a prince, but for a man who had learned to kneel. Morning light spilled across the royal courtyard, the kind of gold that promised beginnings, not endings. The once silent garage was alive again, not just with the sound of engines, but with voices, laughter, chatter, the faint metallic rhythm of tools meeting bolts. Armand moved through the space slowly, no longer as a worker, but as a teacher. Around him stood a dozen young apprentices, boys and girls from nearby villages, palace servants' children, and even a few from the city slums. Their hands were clumsy, their uniforms mismatched, but their eyes burned with the same fire he once carried when the world told him he'd never be more than the help. He adjusted a boy's grip on a wrench. Not force, he said gently. Precision. Machines are like people. If you push too hard, they break. The boy nodded, trying again. The engine purred to life. Cheers erupted. From the doorway, Rafi watched, arms folded, smiling quietly. Zoya stood beside him, now taller, sketching the scene with quick, confident strokes. He's turned the palace into a workshop, Rafi murmured. Zoya grinned. You turned him into hope, Rafi chuckled. No, little one. He already was. I just stopped standing in its way. Armand turned, spotting them both, and gave a small nod before returning to his students. The montage of days unfolded, Armand teaching them to fix royal carriages, Zoya showing them how to paint their names on the toolboxes, Nadrafi stopping by to share tea, sleeves rolled, laughing as grease stained his cuffs. Each moment stitched into the next, forming a tapestry of change that reached beyond marble walls. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Armin gathered the apprentices together. They formed a semicircle around him, hands still dirty, eyes bright. He held up an old wrench, the same one that had once hung behind glass. This, he said, isn't just for fixing cars. It's for fixing chances. Every turn, every effort means something. He looked at them all, proud, steady. Remember this, he said. Fix what's broken, but never break your own dignity. The courtyard fell silent, the kind of silence that means a truth has taken root. Zoya wiped her hands on a rag and whispered to Rafi, He sounds like a king when he says things like that. Rafi smiled softly. Maybe he always was. He just didn't need a crown. The royal grand hall shimmered with light, chandeliers glowing like constellations, silk banners rippling high above rows of guests. It was the annual royal gala, a night where nobility came dressed in wealth and titles. And this time, one guest stood among them in something far simpler: dignity. Armin stood at the base of the marble staircase, his palms slightly damp. He'd repaired this very hall before. The lights, the railings, even the hinges on the grand doors. But tonight, he was part of its story. The orchestra hushed as Prince Rafi took the stage. Layla stood beside him, radiant, her hands clasped. Rafi spoke, his voice calm but full of weight. Every kingdom, he said, has its treasures. Gold, jewels, artifacts. But none of those matter without the people who keep its heart beating. The audience leaned in. Tonight, he continued, we honor one such man, not for his title, but for his truth. Armand froze as Rafi turned toward him. The crowd began to part, leaving a clear path up the stairs. Armand Khan, Rafi said, his tone steady. You taught us that greatness doesn't need inheritance, only integrity. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Rafi reached for something held by an attendant, a familiar fabric folded neatly in his hands. This, Rafi said, lifting it gently, once warmed me when I was lost in the cold. It belonged to a man who had nothing, yet gave everything. Gasps spread through the room as he unfolded the jacket. The same one Armand had once lent to a stranger on a freezing night. Only now, its back carried a golden embroidery of the royal crest, stitched with care and honor. Rafi descended the steps and placed it around Armand's shoulders. It's not just a jacket anymore, he said softly. It's a symbol of what holds this palace together. Kindness. The crowd rose, one by one. Nobles, servants, children, all standing. The applause swelled, echoing through the marble like thunder turned to gratitude. Zoya clapped the hardest, her smile brighter than the chandeliers above, and as Armand bowed slightly, humble, overwhelmed, Rafi whispered, You once gave warmth to a prince. Tonight, you warm a kingdom. The night was calm, the kind of calm that feels like the world finally exhaling. Beyond the palace walls, the stars blinked over the city like shy witnesses. The grand fountains had gone still, and the lanterns along the garden paths flickered softly, their flames bowing in the breeze. Armand sat on a stone bench just outside the palace gates. The same gates he'd once stood before as a stranger, nervous, clutching a card and a hope he didn't trust. But tonight, he wasn't waiting to be let in. He belonged. The jacket rested over his shoulders, the royal crest catching faint moonlight. He wasn't wearing it for pride, but for memory. Zoya sat beside him, wrapped in a shawl, sketching the night sky. Her grown-up hands moved with the same wonder she'd had as a child. Baba, she said quietly, not looking up from her page, do you ever think about that night? The one when you gave your jacket away? Armand smiled, his eyes drifting toward the distant hills. Every time the wind gets cold. Zoya tilted her head. Do you ever regret it? He chuckled softly. No, some warmth isn't meant to be kept. A gentle silence followed. The stars above seemed closer than ever, scattered like the bolts and screws of the universe itself. Rafi appeared in the distance, walking along the garden path, hands clasped behind his back. He nodded when he saw them, and Armand returned the gesture. A silent exchange between equals, no words needed. Zoya finished her sketch and held it up. The palace under a field of stars, and two figures sitting outside. One small, one broad-shouldered, the jacket draped between them like a bridge. She grinned. I call it Where the Wind Once Bit. Armand's eyes softened. Good name. They sat together quietly, the night wrapping around them like the jacket itself. Familiar, earned, infinite. The wind brushed past again, cool but gentle this time. And as Armand looked up at the stars, his voice came low, certain, and full of peace. Sometimes, he said, kindness warms more than fire ever could. The screen fades slowly to black, the sound of a light breeze and distant laughter carrying through the dark.